with their access to the poll. It's okay to play politics. And here's how I think about it. What they are doing is they are backdooring racism behind politics to get to this decision and to justify them what is happening in particular right now in all the southern states.
The Supreme Court just gutted the Voting Rights Act again. The same court that torched Shelby County in 2013 just came back in 2021 with Brnovich versus DNC and finished the job. And Kamala Harris, outside office, no teleprompter, no filter, went on a live stream and called it what it is, backdooring racism through the courts. She named the scheme, she named the states, she named the tools they are using against Black and brown voters, and she did not stop there. If you want to know what Democrats are actually willing to do when the courts are weaponized, watch this. Like, subscribe, and do not look away.
I've been spending a lot of time in the South. I was recently, for example, in North Carolina because I'd heard about this group of students that were organizing. And so, Latasha, I went down there to North Carolina A&T, which is the largest HBCU in the country. And I met with these students, about a dozen of them. And they're organizing because the elections officials in North Carolina from the largest HBCU in the United States of America took the polling place from those kids, from those young leaders, took their polling place because they're so afraid of the power of those young leaders to activate and to vote and to change the status quo and to topple some of these people from their perch. They're so scared. People have been asking me, you think they're going to try and cancel the elections? No, because, if you thought No King's Day was a thing, people will take to the streets if they cancel the election. That's not their agenda. It's about making it more difficult for people to vote and vote and put obstacles in front of them every day. When these students went up to the Capitol in North Carolina, they went up and they went to the chamber and they wanted to speak. And you know what the leaders of the state legislature told those students? They said, you have 5 minutes to leave.
Let that sink in. Students from the largest Black university in America, NC-A&T State University in Greensboro, drove to the state capitol, filled the chamber, and stood up to fight for their right to vote. They were met with a threat to call the police and a 5-minute clock to clear the room. This is not 1963. This is 2026. The Republican-controlled Guilford County Board of Elections voted 3-2 to strip the early voting site directly off the NC-A&T campus ahead of the 2026 midterms. Students who showed up in January to the State Board of Elections meeting in Raleigh to beg for their polling place back described being laughed at. The board chairman threatened to call the cops. One student said, and this is documented, that the outcome would have been different if they had been white. The board chairman said he resented that. The board then voted against them anyway. And here's what you need to understand about the legal architecture behind all of this. The Supreme Court made this possible. In 2013, Shelby County versus Holder eliminated the pre-clearance requirement, the rule that forced states with a history of racial discrimination to get federal approval before changing their voting laws. States immediately began flooding the zone with suppression legislation. Then, in July 2021, the same court came back with Brnovich versus DNC, a 6-3 decision that narrowed Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act so dramatically that the Brennan Center found it was cited 60% less often in discrimination complaints in the 40 months after the ruling than in the 54 months before it. In plain English, they didn't just make it harder to vote, they made it harder to sue the people making it harder to vote. This is a two-pronged strategy. Gut the federal shield, then let the states loose. What Harris is describing is not paranoia. It is the documented, sequenced dismantling of voting rights for Black Americans, and the Supreme Court is the architect.
And I think there's going to be some risk that we're going to have to assume along with that, but we need to be prepared to be able to handle that. I think that we need an expanded playbook in a way that we invite all ideas that we have basically, look, that we say, look, this is a moment where there are no bad ideas. A no bad idea brainstorm is what I'd like to call it. And in that no bad ideas brainstorm, we talk about what we need to do and think about doing around the Electoral College. We talk about the idea of Supreme Court reform, which includes expanding the Supreme Court. We invite a conversation about multi-members districts. We talk about look that if we win the Senate, which we should and we will, then the Senate Judiciary Committee should have rules that they put in place so when these people come before as nominees to the Supreme Court and lie, that they are held to account and consequence. Not just that somebody goes on cable news and says they lied, but that there are rules in place to actually penalize people for lying to a Senate Judiciary Committee. That we agree that it is right to have ethics rules for Supreme Court justices. And let's put those in place. Let's talk about statehood for Puerto Rico and DC.
There it is, the former Vice President of the United States, who was 2 months ago a major party presidential nominee, just called on national television for expanding the Supreme Court, reforming the Electoral College, adding multi-member districts, giving Puerto Rico and Washington, D.C. statehood, and creating Senate judiciary rules that punish Supreme Court nominees who commit perjury during confirmation hearings. Every one of those proposals is a political earthquake in this country. And she did not stammer. She did not hedge. She read them off like a grocery list. Let's deal with the perjury point directly, because it is the sharpest blade in that list. During their Senate confirmation hearings, Justices Neil Gorsuch, Brett Kavanaugh, and Amy Coney Barrett each said some version of the same thing, that Roe v. Wade was settled precedent, stare decisis, a case they would approach with respect. Senator Susan Collins said Kavanaugh personally assured her Roe was settled law. 1 year after his confirmation, Kavanaugh voted to overturn it. Clarence Thomas has never recused himself from cases involving the January 6th insurrection, despite his wife's documented involvement in attempts to overturn the 2020 election. There are no ethics rules that compel him to. He can simply choose not to, and he has. Harris is not proposing something radical. She is proposing that the most powerful court in the country operate under the same accountability standards as the people that court rules over. The idea that Supreme Court justices should be the only professionals in America who face no enforceable ethics code, that they can accept luxury travel from billionaires with cases before the court, that they can make material misstatements to the Senate, that they can rule on cases involving their own family members' political organizations and face zero institutional consequence is the radical idea. Harris is the one calling it out. And on court expansion, 9 is not a sacred number. The Supreme Court had 6 justices for most of its early history. Congress has changed the court size 7 times. The current number was set in 1869. What is happening right now, a 6-3 supermajority installed through a stolen seat and a rushed confirmation in the final days of a presidency, is itself the aberration. Harris is simply refusing to pretend otherwise.
These are the things I think that we've got to do. We've got to neutralize these red states from cheating, including blue states expanding their maps. And all of this, I think, is look, we got to fight fire with fire. These folks are playing to win. We got to play to win too. And they're ruthless. And look, we are never going to violate the law or do anything unethical or immoral, but we need to be ruthless too. And that means knowing the tools that are at our disposal or are within our reach. And yes, there may be risk associated with reaching for them. But look, this is what a fight looks like. And the stakes are too high. And when I look at like those young leaders in North Carolina A&T, I look at the Gen Zers and the millennials who are on this call. This is a fight worth having. When you know what you stand for, you know what to fight for. And I'll just end with this. I strongly believe that when you feel powerless, you are powerless. When you feel powerful, you are powerful. We are powerful.
She is right. and the history backs her up. The Voting Rights Act of 1965 was not handed to anyone. It was extracted from the Edmund Pettus Bridge in Selma, from Bloody Sunday, from the bodies of John Lewis and Jimmy Lee Jackson, from the jail cells and the billy clubs and the fire hoses, and the years of organizing that forced a resistant Congress and a calculating president to finally put their names on legislation that meant something. It did not come from politeness. It did not come from both sidesing the question of whether Black Americans deserved to vote. It came from people who decided they were powerful, who acted like they were powerful, and who refused to accept a system designed to make them feel otherwise. And now that system is reasserting itself through the courts, through election boards controlled by party loyalists, through state legislatures that tell Black students they have 5 minutes to get out, through a Supreme Court that has, in 2 landmark rulings, systematically disarmed the legal tools that made the VRA mean something. The question Harris is raising is not a partisan one. It is the oldest question in American democracy. Who is the system actually for? Because when a 6-3 court can rewrite a statute Congress just passed to protect minority voters, when justices face zero accountability for what they said under oath to get confirmed, when election boards can strip polling places from 15,000 Black students at the largest HBCU in the country and face no consequences, that is not a functioning democracy. That is a managed one. Harris is proposing that Democrats stop accepting the managed version and start fighting for the real one. Court expansion, ethics enforcement, Puerto Rico and D.C. statehood, multi-member districts, an expanded map. She is calling it a no bad ideas brainstorm. But what she is really calling for is what every successful political movement has always required: the willingness to treat your opponent as the serious threat they actually are, and to respond with the full force of every legal tool at your disposal. The students at NCA&T walked 30 minutes along a highway with no sidewalk to cast a ballot. They drove to Raleigh and filled a statehouse chamber and were laughed at and threatened with police. And they are still organizing. They are still showing up. That is what powerful looks like when the system is rigged. The question is whether the people with the platform, the people with the reach, the donors, the institutional infrastructure, the political networks will finally match that energy. Kamala Harris just said on a live stream in front of the country that she is willing to. Whether the Democratic Party machinery follows her lead or retreats into procedural comfort will determine whether 2026 is the start of something real or just another election where the right fights to win and the left fights to feel good about losing. Share this video. The people in it don't have the platform. You do.